Krystal, we've talked a lot actually about the expected military parade here in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. So let's get to the updates on that story. Massive presence here in Washington. There are lots of videos going viral. You can see it of tanks being loaded in, brought on flatbeds into the city. Let's go ahead and listen to what Donald Trump had to say about this yesterday. We can roll B1.
Celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force.
All right, so estimated price tag between $25 and $45 million. We can start rolling.
Yeah. Bring Elon and the chainsaw back. Let's doge it.
Chainsaw. Here's B2. You can actually see why the price tag is as high as it is. This is tanks rolling into D.C., the Washington Monument in the background. It's going to be down, I believe, Constitution Avenue on Saturday between like 6 and 9 p.m., I think is roughly when it's scheduled to go for. This is... Yeah, I mean, you're looking at tanks rolling down the streets. Now, Krystal, before we toss to whether the roads are equipped to handle this, that's a different question. Trump, the legend here, everyone remembers Trump tried to do this in his first term after going to France, seeing a French military parade and wanting to bring it back to the United States. People like Jim Mattis were uncomfortable with it in Trump 1.0, but now Trump is, much more staffed by loyalists. Pete Hegseth is an obvious example of that. People who are ideologically aligned with him and aligned with sort of going along with his mission, or they're aligned with that sort of that loyalty to Trump, let's put it that way, and have really no hesitation about going along with this. There is a scheduled day of defiance, or a planned day of defiance for protests on Saturday. The Washington Post is reporting, this is B3. We've heard about this actually since Trump said he was going to do the military parade here in D.C. We've heard that they're actually needing to put metal plates. And I've seen some of them actually. They're not fun if you're like biking around, but they've had to reinforce the road with metal plates to prevent damage when you have 100 vehicles, in addition to, as the Post reports, thousands of soldiers, dozens of tanks, and more than 100 other vehicles scheduled for that procession along Constitution Avenue. The gross weight, so the ones that are supported by the government, that can be supported by the government vehicles, would be 80,000 pounds. But the Abrams tanks each weigh about 70 tons. There's 28 of those planning that the administration is planning to roll down in the parade. Again, for the Army's 250th birthday, which I will say actually is on Saturday. It actually does coincide with Donald Trump's birthday and a Saturday in the summer. I don't know, Krystal, whether that's an unfortunate coincidence. For Trump, it's clearly a fortunate coincidence, but I think he would be doing something for the Army's 250th birthday, to be honest. Anyway, he really wanted to have this military parade. Maybe what would the QAnon people say about that? Maybe there's something to... We're supposed to be reading into this something.
I've lost the thread a bit with where the QAnon people are at this point. I think there's splinter factions. I know there are some who had turned on Michael Flynn, some who were still in league with Michael Flynn. So I've lost touch a little bit with where they are at this point. And they're probably out there justifying Palantir taking all of her data and creating this giant panopticon as somehow fighting the deep state is probably what they're up to at this point. But
trust the process.
Listen, if this was a one-off and you were just having a military parade and there wasn't National Guardsmen who'd been federalized over the objections of the California governor in the street, Marines being deployed against American citizens, a U.S. Congresswoman who was just indicted on charges that could get her 17 years in prison, by the way. If you didn't have Trump out there saying that we are going to meet protesters with overwhelming force, making no distinction between whether they were peaceful or whether they were violent, maybe then you'd go, it's a waste of money. It's going to mess up the DC streets, which really don't need that. DC budget really doesn't need the extra tens of millions of dollars it's going to take to repair the damage, et cetera. But is it the biggest deal in the world? No. When you put all of those pieces together, it really does feel like you are building to a crescendo of authoritarian power grab, fascist imagery that is quite intentional and quite frightening and quite overwhelming. And that's not even to mention the things that we talked about before, the attacks on public universities, the crushing of dissent and free speech, the counter-terror czar basically framing anyone who is a protester of any of these administrations' policies as providing material support for terrorists. The aforementioned Palantir database that seeks to surveil and compile all of the data on everyone who's in the country, U.S. citizen and not, so that that crushing of dissent can be wielded much more effectively. When you put all of these pieces together, troubling does not begin to describe it. And so I think this is a very fraught, combustible moment with potentially dire and far-reaching consequences for the direction that this country goes in. And especially, when you do have large-scale protests that have been pre-planned, which, people should have the right to protest their government. That's kind of, a core American value. When you have those protests planned, when you already have Trump and Stephen Miller and others providing the rhetorical justification to launch this mass crackdown, I think everyone, I don't care where you are in the political spectrum, I think everyone should be deeply concerned for what that means for your rights, for the rights of, your friends, family, your neighbors, for your ability to dissent from anything this government or a future regime does as well. I think we're on very, very treacherous ground, and that it will be difficult to walk back from some of the things that are being done right now in this time.
Let's put B4 on the screen. This is a local news breakdown of the expected cost here. So Trump has said on Meet the Press that the cost is, quote, peanuts compared to the value of doing it. But again, that number is potentially as high as $45 million. And they broke down even like 16 million of that could come from just repairing the roads afterwards. So, they're also advertising really heavily in the area within like 5 hours of DC, roughly 5 hours of DC, trying to get people to come to it. I think that's another open question about this. What we can look at here on B5 is counter protests that are planned to spread throughout the country. And one of the things, Krystal, building on what you were just talking about, I wanted to mention is these are being these are being organized under the banner of No Kings. And so if you're looking at the map here, there are planned counter protests all over the country. But No Kings, I think, is really interesting branding. And I think it's really interesting branding for a counter-protest movement juxtaposed with the resistance movement of 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, because No Kings is implicitly and inherently patriotic, and I think appeals to the patriotism of the average American in a way that resistance never did. So I'm curious what you make of that, Krystal, because I think that's actually a very, for the left, positive development.
Yeah, I think it is a smart framing, and I think apt, and the cat has just joined the conversation as you see behind me.
No kings except for Salem.
Except for Salem.
Yeah.
Salem is definitely the king in this household. But no, I think it is intelligent branding, and this is why I know. Sagar, and it seems like you feel like, the crackdown in LA, like this is going to play into Trump's hands. And I'm like really leery at this point of offering political predictions because I think things have been so difficult to predict ultimately. But I think this is too much, too fast, where the fears of Trump and the worst concerns, the gravest concerns about how this man would behave if you gave him the power of the presidency again are just undeniably present. If you look at the polling, people are not crazy about the protesters. People are never crazy about protesters, although actually with the exception of the BLM protesters, they were overwhelmingly popular. But even if you look back at like the civil rights movement, those protesters were also not popular. If you look at Trump's response to it, using Marines against protesters, wildly unpopular. His ratings on immigration, still okay, they're his best ratings, but he's barely above water if he is at all. That's in like the best polls. Some of the polls find his deportation, like ratings even on things like deportations, deeply underwater. Americans, they don't want a king. I do think there is a reaction against this very clear like power grab. And there is so much in the floods the zone strategy that is hitting people in the face right now that I would not be so confident if I was the Republicans that this politically is to their benefit. Now, maybe their plan is for it not really to matter that much what the American people think about it. Maybe their plan is to, continue with their power grab such that, dissent is crushed, that there is limited ability to voice your concerns electorally. I'm not talking like, they're going to cancel elections or whatever, but you can see scenarios where the pretext of crushing protests is used to take control of some of the voting apparatus. You could certainly, it's very easy to imagine situations where they just outright reject whatever the election results are that are unfavorable to them. So maybe they don't particularly care about the politics of it, but to the extent they do, I think this is much more treacherous than they imagine, especially when, the reality of who is being deported and the way that it's being handled is staring people in the face. They're having to grapple with the pregnant mom who's married to an American citizen, or the dad with no criminal record who has all the agents show up at his house, or the son who's just like posting flyers and is being met with this insane use of force. Because the truth of the matter is, Emily, that there is no ability to do a mass deportation strategy that doesn't involve a massive police state that is going to impact literally everyone. And I think we've already seen that with the crushing of the pro-Palestine dissent, because by definition, you have to sort out, okay, who is citizen and who is non-citizen. That means that you are going to have to, inquire and have your surveillance state hit citizens as well. The money that's in the budget for the big, beautiful bill, for ICE, for detention centers, there is no way to just keep that confined to whatever population it is. I think it's mostly like, if you look at the polling, people are very comfortable, as they should be, with deporting like criminal undocumented immigrants. You go beyond that, the numbers actually really fall off a cliff. And when you ask specifically about people who have no criminal record who have been here for a long time, I'm talking it's like 75-25 that people feel like, why are you messing with these people? They're just like living their lives and not causing people any kind of harm. So again, maybe they don't care about the politics, which is a terrifying, I think, and real possibility. But to the extent they do, I don't think they're on nearly as firm a ground as they feel they are right now.
No, I think they care about the politics. I think they're also, some of them are very online. But I also still think on the narrow question of the riots, I do think I do agree more with Sagar on that. I think it's helpful to Trump because people like Gavin Newsom still haven't addressed the problem that voters care more about in a satisfactory way. But that aside, the no kings thing is really interesting to me because I feel like that's sort of, this man is having a $45 million, potentially $45 billion military parade. It happens to fall on his birthday. And he is like, in some cases, encouraging snowflakery from like law enforcement that has to cover their faces in anti-American. Like, I think there's something that Dems can tap into that is almost emasculating, but not in the way that the resistance thought that they had him by claiming there was a P-tape and, having those disgusting blow-up balloons of him everywhere he went, where he was like naked. It was just weird, didn't work. And Krystal, this because you live outside of D.C. Like, there is something very real for a lot of people who maybe don't love Trump, but continue to vote for him and continue to sympathize with him or agree with him over Democrats on some of these culture war questions because they do love America. People can disagree with this, but they feel like Trump loves America. And again, you could disagree with that. You can hate that. You can think it's wrong. But that's something that people like about Trump is that he seems to like the country. And I do think that's a mistake that Democrats made in the resistance era was not meeting so many people where they are on that question. question, and it allowed them to look unpatriotic and allowed the American people to think that they were unpatriotic because they weren't kind of leading with that question in particular. And I think that's why the No Kings branding is actually like very, very smart for the left.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think that it is an intelligent branding, and especially, I mean, this is the way he behaves in everything, you know, even with the tariffs, wanting people to come and bend the knee. You know, he wants to make it so that FEMA aid is dispatched at his bequest. You know, this is the way that he operates in every respect. And so when you put the label on it, all these pieces fit together, including the use of the American U.S. military as his own private force. Secretary of the Army actually called it Trump's army or his army this morning on Fox News. So they really are pushing that and trying to normalize that sense that this is a force that should be wielded at the whims of the president, which is not the way that. Obviously, that is fundamentally un-American, and that is consistent with the way that a king would behave, not a duly elected president of the United States. So, yeah, I agree with you that I think it's intelligent branding. We'll see how widespread the protests are. We'll see what the crackdown is going to be. And last thing I'll say on this is I also think that there is just something deeply disturbing about watching all of these tanks being rolled into D.C. that hits on a visceral level as well. You know, we talk about the optics of the protests and what people take from that, et cetera. And, you know, I'm not one that says like, oh, that doesn't matter and we can't talk about it or whatever. But I think equally damning are the optics of tanks rolling into the nation's capital for a celebration of the president's birthday. That's just, with many people, that is just not going to sit right.
Speaking of the tariffs, but there's a tiny bit of news on this front, actually a massive bit of news on this front. Trump has posted while we were recording, Krystal, that the deal with China is done, subject to final approval with President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me, he says. And we are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. And of course, he ends his post in my favorite sign off. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So, Krystal, thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, well, they apparently really, I guess, didn't think through the whole rare earth situation, kind of freaked out about that. So that is interesting. I'm sure Soccer and I will dig into that more tomorrow. I feel like we talked too long about LA and Trump. So maybe should we skip over Tulsi and her weird nuclear warning video and jump straight ahead to Jon Stewart? What do you think?
People can look up the weird Tulsi video. They should look up the weird Tulsi video. There would have, there's, maybe we'll talk about it on Friday, but there's some interesting stuff to dig into
It is a good Friday topic. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it for Friday. I mean, the response to it is like probably even more unhinged than a video, but to me, top line take, this is like what happens when you have someone who is an influencer put in a position of power they never really let go of their hold on the influencer world.
My quick take is that Tulsi's freaked out by all of the deep state people that she works with now. And we should mention before we let that go, because we teased it up at the top, Krystal, that there have been significant escalations in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that are getting buried in the domestic news cycle. The BBC headline this morning is record number of drone attacks signals dangerous shift in the war. Large-scale Russian drone attacks on Ukrainian cities are on the rise. There was a bombardment Monday night, and so this is not, we've covered this many times in the last couple of weeks, but this is not de-escalating with the presidency that promised to end it in 24 hours, even if that was sarcastic or hyperbolic. We're into June here, so about 6 months in. So nothing seems to, sadly, there does not seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. A very, very troubling situation and series of escalatory actions that we've been watching unfold there, with the Russians, but with the Ukrainian drone swarm attack inside of Russia, and now Russia responding with an aggressive attack directly on Kyiv. So
and Tulsi Gabbard's video, the connective tissue, is that she was warning about the imminent threat of nuclear war.
The consequences of nuclear war.
Right.
Exactly. All right, guys, 2 quick things. Number 1, by popular demand, we are bringing back the monthly subscription. Number 2, you can get a month free, Ryan, by putting in that promo code BPFree at breakingpoints.com.
Yeah, and I think the most important reason to become a premium subscriber is just as an act of support for the show. It helps us do what we're doing. But if you're curious what the benefits are of doing it, take the free month, and you'll see you get the AMAs, you get the second half of the Friday show, you get it, you get the full show emailed to you earlier. It makes your life much better. Do it for a month at breakingpoints.com. BP free is a promo code. And if after a month your life isn't dramatically improved, you can just cancel. If it is, it's just $10 a month.
There you go.